Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. So, we're coming to the end of 2016. Oh my goodness, finally. Now, this is when critics make their best movies of the year lists, and Hollywood gears up for its annual Academy Awards celebration. Even though the Academy Awards aren't held until February 26th this year, the date every movie lover has circled is January 24th. That's when the nominations are announced, including Best Picture. And of course, that's when the real mudslinging starts. I can't remember a year when everyone agreed on the films that were nominated. The conversation usually ends up being about how political it is that a certain movie got picked, or it'll be about what scandal might hurt a movie's chances, or the scandal might ruin someone's career. Mostly, though, it's about what actor or director, or most importantly, what movie got snubbed. How could they not pick fill in the blank? Of course, as horror fans, we've dealt with this kind of snub so much, it doesn't even register anymore. As a young fan, I remember getting my hopes up in 1975 when Jaws was nominated. It didn't win. But hey, Jaws lost to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of the best films ever made, in my opinion. So it felt fair enough, even though it was really disappointing. Not so much in 1973, when The Exorcist got nominated. Now, I didn't even see the movie yet. I was way too young. But I was flying the horror flag. But because The Exorcist was taken so seriously and it got so much praise, I thought it might win. It did not. And what did The Exorcist lose to? The Sting. Now, you may not be familiar with The Sting. Paul Newman and Robert Redford play two con men in the Depression era who devise a complicated scheme to rip off a gangster. Now, I like The Sting. It's a fun caper movie. But during the time when films like The Godfather, The French Connection, The Last Picture Show, and A Clockwork Orange were radically changing film language, The Sting looks pretty quaint, folks, especially next to The Exorcist. Now, to me, The Exorcist losing to The Sting was the equivalent of Metallica losing to Jethro Tull as best metal band at the Grammys. You like to think that getting a nomination means respect, but when that kind of result happens, you realize they were just throwing you a bone. But believe it or not, it used to be worse. That was progress. How bad was a snub before by the Academy? Well, here's a list of the 8 Best Picture nominees of 1931. Grand Hotel, Aerosmith, Bad Girl, The Champ, 5-Star Final, 1 Hour with You, Shanghai Express, and The Smiling Lieutenant. Remember those? Missing from that list, James Whale's Frankenstein and Todd Browning's Dracula, not even nominated. Now, you might be able to argue that both movies were adaptations from well-known novels, and they may have suffered from comparison. So, let's go to 1933. In that year, 10 movies were nominated for Best Picture. Not nominated? King Kong. Even with 10 slots for nominations, King Kong doesn't even get a nod, doesn't even get to the table. Now, King Kong radically advanced special effects, but it also created a classical romantic storyline that became a template for adventure films. And it created an original character that became an American cinema icon. Considering that this is supposed to be an award for outstanding achievement in motion pictures, not nominating King Kong seems like a joke. But hey, they didn't nominate Psycho in 1960 either. Even Stanley Kubrick, who had every movie he had made since 1965's Dr. Strangelove getting nominated for Best Picture, he had his streak stopped in 1980 with The Shining. Yes, that means Barry Lyndon was nominated and The Shining was not. And even when a horror movie finally breaks through and wins Best Picture, it isn't considered a horror movie. A huge ad campaign successfully turned Silence of the Lambs into a psychological thriller instead of a horror film. Well, a rose is a rose is a rose. Silence of the Lambs is the most obvious Best Picture winner that was really a horror film in disguise, but it's not the only one. And I want to talk about some of those while the Academy of Motion Pictures advertises itself as the creme de la creme. And I'm going to prove to you, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that The Sound of Music is a horror film. I'm kidding, right? Okay, listen, it's all up to interpretation. And that's what's great about art. You don't really have to take this seriously. However, if nothing else, I'll give you some ammo to frustrate that film snob guy at the company Christmas party. Because I do believe there are movies that are considered dramas and thrillers that are really horror films in disguise, no matter what the label says. And those movies reflect and exploit the anxieties of their time just as much as any horror movie, even if they were Oscar winners. So, a little clarification on what I think makes a horror film a horror film. It's very simple. First criteria. Does the movie evoke horror? In other words, does watching it give you feelings of dread, fear, or shock? And secondly, why does the film give you feelings of dread, fear, and shock? What's the reason that the filmmaker wants you to feel that way? Now, those of you who are regular listeners may remember when I made the argument that the movies Deliverance and Dirty Harry were horror movies disguised as action films. In each of those movies, the filmmakers made conscious choices to use visual imagery and tone that inspired dread, fear, or shock. And it's the same for these Oscar winners. These filmmakers intentionally want you to feel those emotions, to make you feel vulnerable. And these movies, intentionally or unintentionally, reflected the anxieties of their times. I think it's fitting that these movies are classified as Westerns. In a way, Westerns are the kissing cousins to horror movies. Both styles create myths and legends to tell their stories. Both styles have a heightened sense of good and evil, and both styles deal with the dangers of the unknown. The unknown can be zombies or Cherokees, or they can wear a bandana, or they can wear a hockey mask. And both movie types get their tension from a sense of isolation. In a horror movie, it might be a dense black forest or a house at the end of the street. In a Western, it can be the rocky and desolate high country or a fort at the edge of the territories. And the empty plains of the West can be just as foreign and claustrophobic as Antarctica is in The Thing, and deep space is in Alien. In Death Valley, no one can hear you scream. And the first movie I want to talk about is Clint Eastwood's 1992 Best Picture winner, Unforgiven. And this is a horror movie about monsters that walk amongst us, that pass for us. These monsters are cold-blooded killers, but they've gone dormant. Some hide their true nature by blending into the background, hoping to live out their lives unnoticed and unrecognized and unpunished. But some of them aren't hiding. They're unrepentant because they don't see anything wrong with what they've done. Instead of hiding, they look at their surroundings and they adapt their game to fit the tone of the times. They change their prey, but the game hasn't really changed. They still get to have power and dominion over others by playing to people's egos and playing to their fantasies. They give us wish fulfillment, appealing to our legends and lore, the stories we tell ourselves. They come off as tough men in tough times with tough answers, and we swoon. Monsters flourish in dangerous times. When I watched Unforgiven, I remembered an old commercial for Time Life books that covered the outlaws of the Old West. The commercial mentioned John Wesley Hardin, a man so mean he once shot a man for snoring. It's a great storyline, no doubt. But when you look at the details about John Wesley Hardin, you find a 9-year-old boy who nearly stabbed a classmate to death over an argument in the playground. His first kill is at age 15, over a wrestling match with his uncle's freed slave. By the end of that year, he had killed 4 men. When they finally captured him, Hardin claimed to have killed 42 men. Now, if I read those details to you and removed the name and the time period it happened, you'd tell me this was an active serial killer. John Wesley Hardin was a monster because killing was in his nature. And in Unforgiven, even when the monsters want to change, they can't, because it's in their nature. Evil is a force of nature. In Unforgiven, Evil rolls into the small town of Big Whiskey on a force of nature. There are no less than 3 thunderstorms at night in this movie. And at the center of each of those storms, there's a violent act that alters the fates of everyone involved. And one of these storms is right at the beginning of the film. It's jarring because the very first shot of the film is your traditional Western all the way. It's a wide-angle shot right out of a John Ford movie. Gorgeous sunset with a lone homestead in the distance that's silhouetted against the emptiness of the frontier. And then we hear ominous thunder. And then we are on the main street in Big Whiskey at night in the pouring rain. And the only light comes from the windows of the saloon way down the block. This isn't just a quick establishing shot. We start to crawl slowly down the street, and the only sound we hear is thunder, until we hear a woman screaming in terror. Now this is the visual choice that Eastwood used to introduce us to the town and its residents. A dark and stormy night indeed. The next thing we see is a prostitute fighting for her life as a huge cowboy slashes her face with his Bowie knife. The cowboy's partner tries to stop him, but the cowboy doesn't stop the carnage until the saloon owner puts a gun to his head. Both cowboys are held accountable for the act, and they're tied up to wait for the sheriff. And it's this act that puts the plot into motion. And this is where we are introduced to the first monster in the movie. He's the only character that is present during all 3 dark and stormy nights. And it's his actions that set all the violence and all the death that comes later into motion. And that's Little Bill Daggett, the sheriff, played to perfection by Gene Hackman. Yes, there are 2 monsters in the film. The first one is obvious, even if all you've ever seen was the movie poster. Clint Eastwood is Unforgiven. And Eastwood's character, William Money, is a truly terrifying psychopath. William Money is an infamous outlaw, a name everyone knows. He's a boogeyman. Stories of his atrocities spread everywhere. And the only reason he's not dead is because he changed his ways and hides in obscurity as a pig farmer. But he lives with the expectation that someone who knows those stories are going to show up to kill him. But it's Little Bill that's really interesting, because Unforgiven takes place in a movie universe where everybody has a story and everyone believes the stories they're told. There are even writers who follow legendary gunslingers around so they can publish their memoirs. And yet, Little Bill is a mystery. He's a small-town sheriff in Wyoming, and even his deputies don't know much about him. In one scene, the deputies gear up to detain a gunslinger who won't turn in his guns to them, which is Little Bill's zero-tolerance gun law in town. Bill is noticeably absent at the posse, and there's doubt among the deputies about his courage, because they've never seen him in action. One deputy says, "Well, Bill isn't scared. Little Bill came out of Kansas and Texas, boys, and he worked in some tough towns." But that's the most he can say, because there's no stories to tell. So he's not a famous lawman like Wyatt Earp. Who is he? What is he? How does he get everyone to give up their guns in a lawless world? We find out more when Little Bill confronts the killer who won't give up his guns. Now, the deputies and the townsfolk might not know any stories about Little Bill, but this killer does. They have history. Because killers know their own kind. And this killer is terrified of Little Bill Daggett. Now, we don't know what scares this very cocky professional killer into acting like a kid getting picked on by a bully. Is it that the Little Bill he knew, who he heard was dead, by the way, is that crazy and mean a killer? Or is it that someone who is that crazy and mean a killer has a badge now? We get a hint of the answer as Little Bill knocks the gunman to the ground. While townsfolk fill the street, Little Bill kicks the man in the face several times while he's on the ground and unarmed. He keeps kicking him, brutally, continually, long after the man surrenders. Ostensibly, he's making an example of his old crime partner to scare away any other gunman. But we know Little Bill is toying with him from the moment they meet. He sadistically plays with his prey, smiling, mocking him. He's in total control. In this new life Little Bill has built, he's adapted his game to focus on only certain prey now, people nobody's going to defend. But he's doing it for the good of the citizens, right? You know, the ones he's disarmed, the ones he's made dependent on him, the ones that he writes all the rules for. He's made a little world that he has dominion over, and the citizens thank him for it. Little Bill has made a cottage industry out of his killer instinct. Now, I don't doubt that both Little Bill and Eastwood's William Money want to change, and that they both try to do this in their own ways, but they are just different than the rest of us. In the Wild West, there are tough men, there are mean men, and then there are dangerous men. The dangerous men, the real monsters, stay alive because they stay calm when they kill. As Little Bill says at one moment, that's why there's so few dangerous men around like me. Or as William Money says after he kills 5 armed men, I was lucky, but I've always been lucky when it comes to killing folks. Being the top predator is just too intoxicating for these men to walk away from forever. Try as they might, their true nature eventually exposes them for what they are. Like modern-day serial killers, these 2 men have a fatal flaw. Once the killer instinct kicks in, it takes over, like a compulsion. William Money spent 11 years on his farm. He buried his wife. He raised his children. But all it takes is one proposition to kill 2 cowboys who have it coming because they cut up a whore, and the compulsion kicks in. His new life that he made starts to die the moment he leaves the farm to go kill for money. He convinces an old partner to ride with him, and you can hear the compulsion start to take over slowly. Remember that guy I shot in the mouth and his teeth blew out the back of his head? His friend says, yeah, I remember. You know, he didn't do anything to deserve that. Even though Money is looking at these things as his sins, he suddenly can't stop talking about them. And as they travel, William Money gets sick. Real sick. He starts to have fever dreams where the mutilated bodies of his kills are coming for him. William Money, the pig farmer, is dying, and the old monster is taking over. Compulsion takes over Little Bill as well. When he beats the gunslinger in the road, you can tell by the reaction of the townsfolk that this is uncharacteristic and scary behavior. Even his deputies are upset by it. And you can see that Little Bill is upset by it too. He might be upset about it for a different reason. Because monsters like him thrive on passing as normal, and they need to be in control. But his outburst gets the attention of a biography writer, and that's when his compulsion kicks in. He starts out just talking to the writer to debunk the lies about events that he was part of, but soon his ego takes over, and he starts to show his true colors, a smile with cold, dead eyes. He boasts to the writer about his exploits, and he laughs about how he made men beg to live. As his ego swells, he becomes more sadistic and violent in his actions with others. He's showing off for his new biographer, and he is losing control. And his lack of control leads the other monster directly to him. Unforgiven is full of darkness and shadows and rain. The movie is full of stories of violent deaths, and just like John Wesley Hardin, we hear more about the real William Money than we want to know. He is a man who killed women and children easily. The first time Money and Little Bill meet is inside the dark saloon. Money is sick, and his body shakes, and he looks like a creature in the shadows. He talks like he's in a bad dream. It's like he's transforming into something else. Now William Money and Little Bill meet one last time, and that is in the film's climax. It is once again in the dark saloon. But the transformation is over, and the old monster is all that's left of William Money. There are many moments from the climax that are straight out of horror films, but the most horrifying moment to me is when Money realizes that Little Bill is mortally wounded, but not dead yet. Now, during Money's killer rampage, Little Bill never showed any fear. He just showed contempt. He called the guy a coward. Because killers know their own kind, and he won't give his killer the joy of his fear. Now, Money stands over Little Bill with dead eyes and loads his rifle. He aims his rifle at Little Bill's face, and he waits. Little Bill looks back with hatred and defiance, and Money waits. And then Little Bill breaks. He gasps out in despair. And then, and only then, does William Money pull the trigger. Now, Unforgiven wasn't a new script. Versions of it date back to 1976, and Clint Eastwood passed on it back then because he thought he should do other things first. And yet, Unforgiven, even though it's an old script and it was a period piece, mirrored the anxieties of 1992. The timing was, unintentionally, right for a catharsis around violence in our culture, because the country was just rocked to its core by the Los Angeles riots just 3 months before the movie premiered. A video of 5 LAPD officers beating an unarmed Rodney King horrified the country. At first, the video seemed like undisputable proof that these officers used excessive force. But that was a divisive issue, and there was much posturing and anger from both sides of the argument. And then the case against the officers went to trial. And then they were acquitted. And then Los Angeles burned for 6 days. When I think of that year of rage, I like to use a quote someone made on TV to encapsulate it. The nation suffered a nervous breakdown. The mental and physical violence was so raw and so damaging, it did make many of us pause and question the legends and lore and stories we told ourselves. And the angry vendetta of the prostitutes in the movie reminded me of the activists that were calling for blood in the streets of L.A. And watching Little Bill, the sheriff, kick a man unconscious on a crowded street brought back the memory of that video. The violence in Unforgiven is empty and ugly and cowardly, and it resolves nothing. True horror. And that was cathartic for a nation that felt lost and fatigued by violence. Sadly, that fatigue was very temporary. Sadly, that seems to be what's in our nature. The sun rises on the desert plains of West Texas. Sand and sagebrush and treeless mountains go on forever. You get the feeling that anything could be hiding out there. A police cruiser drives by with a suspect handcuffed in the back seat. The suspect doesn't move or speak, and his face is obscured by shadows. Later, at the small, quiet police station, the arresting officer is on the phone. The suspect sits on a bench in the background. He's out of focus, so he still can't make out his face. Then, casually, he rises and slides the handcuffs off under his legs. The suspect, matter-of-factly, uses these handcuffs to choke the officer as he gracefully falls backwards to the floor with the officer on his chest. As the officer fights and kicks, the suspect just slides and rolls along with the struggle. The suspect stares into space at some distant point, patiently waiting for this dance to end. Although this seems like an extreme and unique situation to us, we can tell this suspect has done this before. Many, many times. There's no context to the violence in this scene. There's no distinct character introductions. We don't even have names for these two. All of this violence just happens. And that makes the murder feel random. And this is how we enter the world of the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men, the Best Picture winner of 2007. This is a horror movie that suggests that no matter how prepared you think you are not prepared for all the horrors the world can offer you. That for everybody, there is something out there that will destroy you if you ever cross paths with it. And every choice you make either moves you closer or further away from that thing. But the real horror is that you are making these choices that you make blind. You have no idea where this thing is, or even what it looks like. And that means even your best plans are at the mercy of random fate. This is a horror movie that says that God really does play dice with the universe. The plot follows a retired Vietnam vet named Llewellyn Moss, who steals a suitcase of money from the scene of a drug deal gone bad in the desert. The rest of the movie is how he defends himself and those he loves from anyone who comes looking for it. It's a simple crime thriller plot, and in all honesty, it's almost immaterial to the horror story we are being told. The suitcase full of money could be a goose that lays golden eggs. The desert could be a beanstalk. The horror at the center of the story is summed up in the opening narration by Sheriff Ed Tom Bell. The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure. I don't want to push my chips forward and go out and meet something I don't understand. That something none of us will understand at the center of this movie has a name, Anton Chigurh. He's a mysterious hitman who is hired to retrieve the suitcase of money. He is also the thing out there that will destroy you if you cross paths with it. Chigurh is a man without pity or remorse, and he is relentless and unstoppable and implacable. He's a large man who has this weird Prince Valiant hairstyle that makes him look like the silent movie version of the Golem. He sticks out like a sore thumb, but he passes through the world barely noticed, even when he's carrying a cylinder of CO2 attached to a bolt gun that's normally used to kill cattle. In fact, he acts as if he assumes nobody notices him. What's scary about Anton is that he doesn't hide much of anything. He just walks into situations and then responds accordingly. It's as if he's tempting fate. Or perhaps he's just paying attention to it. Chigurh exploits how the rest of us are trying to make sense of what's happening, trying to wrap our minds around the logic. Case in point, after he murders the police officer, he just jumps in the patrol car and drives off. He pulls over the next car he sees and asks the driver to get out of the car. The driver asks, "What is this all about?" And Chigurh asks him again, sweetly, to get out of the car. The driver is confused, but he does it. As Chigurh raises the cattle bolt gun to the driver's forehead, the driver asks, "What's that thing?" "Please stand still, sir." And the man is killed instantly as the pneumatic bolt shoots in and out of his brain. While the driver tried to make sense of what was happening, Anton killed him without a struggle. And Anton confounds the police and even other hitmen in the same way. See, everyone is looking for logic and patterns, and Chigurh seems to operate outside of those. Now, Llewellyn Moss, the Vietnam vet who finds the money, does so through a random act of fate. He's hunting antelope in the desert, and he wounds one of the animals. While he follows the animal's blood trail, he literally runs into another blood trail that leads him directly to the money. Like Chigurh, Llewellyn walks into situations and he responds accordingly. He's a dark character himself who obviously learned to think like the enemy while he was in Vietnam. He expects the worst, and that helps him narrowly escape other hitmen who are after him. Llewellyn knows how to set traps, he knows how to use weapons, and he knows how to keep his head while he's under fire. And the horror comes from our slow realization that all of that won't save him. As another hitman tells Llewellyn when he tries to warn him about Chigurh, "You're not cut out for this. You don't understand. You can't make a deal with him. He's a peculiar man. You might even say he has principles that transcend money and drugs. He's not like you or me." If Chigurh has principles, we don't know what they are, because it doesn't matter if you're guilty or innocent, or even if you're doing a good deed. If you cross paths with him, you die. As the cat and mouse game continues, Anton Chigurh seems less a man and more of a force of evil. The Coen brothers use all kinds of horror tropes to make him mythic, nearly supernatural. His weapons, like the cattle bolt gun and a shotgun with a silencer, are weird and illogical and frightening and make him even more alien. He rarely speaks, and there are many times where the Coen brothers don't even let us see him. We just hear him. There's a scene where we hear Chigurh slowly walking up a hotel staircase and down a hallway while Llewellyn hides in a room. There are many times where we don't see Chigurh. We just see the carnage he wreaks. We see muzzle flashes from dark corners and dark windows. We see innocent bystanders drive by and they suddenly explode from silent bullets that come from nowhere. He even walks into a big corporate building in the middle of a workday and kills the guy who hired him, and then walks out undetected. In that scene, there's a witness standing by who asks Chigurh, "Are you going to kill me?" "That depends. Do you see me?" What is he? There's a recurring visual cue that's used to show that Anton Chigurh has been somewhere. He uses his cattle bolt gun to blow the locks out of doors so he can enter and kill. It leaves this big hole in the door, exactly the size of the lock. He just shoots the lock out. It reminded me of some old superstitions where evil spirits would enter homes through keyholes, so the superstitious kept the key in the door lock. A certain thriller writer once described the difference between thrillers and horror as this. In thrillers, there is tension, suspense, and scares, but they come from real-world, understandable reasons taken to extremes. The world of the thriller film uses a grotesque logic, but still works with real-world motives, causes, and effects. In horror, though, the very world of the film rejects reason. You cannot understand your enemy or his rationale at all, and his very existence may fly in the face of the standard operating procedures of the universe. The only universe where Anton Chigurh is understood is the universe of Anton Chigurh. Is he the embodiment of blind chance in the universe? Or is he blind fate? This is a horror movie because no matter what anyone does or knows, it doesn't matter. Nobody, not even the innocent, are saved. Even the police can't save anyone. In fact, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell never even lays eyes on Chigurh. He is useless except to bear witness to a change in the world. The police follow patterns. They follow logic. The monster they chase does not. After Anton Chigurh returns to the scene of a murder to murder someone else the very next night, an old-time sheriff says, "It don't make no sense. How do you defend against that?" Towards the end of the movie, Sheriff Bell returns to a murder scene at a motel. He is alone. It is nighttime. As he goes to open the room door, he looks down and sees that the lock is missing and that telltale hole is there. You can sense his fear. And we see a shot of Anton on the other side of the door. He is right on the other side, sitting in the dark up against the wall, shotgun in hand, waiting. Bell hesitates, and then he pushes open the door. It bangs against the wall. Nothing is there. Bell searches the motel room. He sees that the bathroom window is locked from within. And then Bell sits down on the bed, relieved to be alone, and that it was just his imagination. And then he looks at the wall. Someone has removed the AC vent. The screws are laying on the floor there. The AC vent is way too small for a man to slide through. It's nothing but a hole, really. Like a keyhole. By the end of the movie, Sheriff Bell considers Chigurh a ghost. No Country for Old Men went on to win 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. When I looked up No Country for Old Men online to research this episode, Wikipedia described it as a neo-Western, neo-noir thriller film. Wow, it's a mouthful. It seems the only thing No Country for Old Men isn't is a horror film. It almost feels like they pushed their chips forward and met something they didn't understand. In 2010, the Academy Awards show did a tribute to the horror film. The stars of Twilight were there to say some words before introducing the film clips. In their speech, it was mentioned that it had been 37 years since the last horror film was nominated for Best Picture, which was The Exorcist, which means they were not including Silence of the Lambs, obviously. And then the tribute started, the movie clips start, and a funny thing happened. There were not 1, but 2 clips from Silence of the Lambs. And thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. And I've also updated my Hellbent for Horror website, hellbentforhorror.com. You can download every episode directly from there, read any newsletters, and you can go to any of my social websites and emails all from the homepage. You can IM me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and you can find me on Twitter at hellbenthorror. A lot of the great conversations I have with fans happens on Twitter at hellbenthorror. Now, for you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me. I thank you in advance. And thank you for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. It really helps. Till next time, stay hellbent.